or concrete objects. However, God has infinite wisdom, put a cycle of time in place, starting in the book of Genesis, and that time that's put in place starts out with a day, which is subdivided into a day and a night. So that gets a little bit confusing when you think in terms of a period of darkness and a period of light. One of them is called night, the other is called day, but you bring them together and it's still a day. Okay, which starts incidentally at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, or at sunset, wherever you're at. And in the light period, obviously, the day period starts at sunrise. So we think of time in terms of midnight to midnight. They thought it in terms of sunset to sunset. So when you see in the Bible in Genesis where it says, and the evening and the morning were the first day, well, the evening was the beginning of the day, of the night period of the day, and the morning was the beginning of the daylight period of the day. So if they just, take a little bit of time, correct the Old Testament in the English and say, okay, it's not night and day, it's nighttime and daylight time, make a day, that would probably make more sense to everybody. So you have 7 days, make a week, 6 are yours, 7 belongs to the Lord as a Sabbath. So now we have the beginning of this 7-day cycle. Strangely enough, a Hebrew year is 52 weeks. And how it's based is off the courses of the priests. So a priest served a week, and there were 24 courses of priests. So they served half of the year, 24 weeks. The other half of the year they served again 24 weeks. So they served 2 times in their weekly rotations. And then there were 4 holidays, or 4 weeks where there were holidays where they were all required to come to the temple to serve. So you have 48 plus 4 is 52. So in a Jewish religious year, there were 52 weeks. Okay, armed with that, now we start talking about their years. And their years are based on the rotation of the sun, solar. So when the sun is in a certain position in the sky, that's the beginning of the year. And they tend to pick 2 different times for the beginning of the year, depending on if they're talking about a civil or a religious year. The civil year starts in September, right around the summer or the fall equinox. Equal space, solstices are okay. And then the beginning of the religious year begins in the spring equinox. And how they determine that, they got it all figured out. So anyway, that's the kind, and Passover coincides in conjunction with the spring equinox as well. So they do a year, kind of the way we do, and then they start measuring numbers of years. So they get 6 years that they can do whatever they want. On the 7th year, they're obligated to do nothing. They can practice a trade, but they can't grow anything. They're not allowed to tend the vineyards, tend the orchards, plant the wheat, plant anything. So when it comes up, that's what they harvest on the 7th year. Now, you take 7 cycles of 7 years, and you have what's called a Jubilee that occurs on the 50th year. And then this whole cycle starts over in groups of 7 until it gets to 50. So the largest, well, I won't say the largest, but the second largest block of time measurement in the Bible is the Jubilee, which is 50-year increments. Okay, in that particular year, you get to the end of a Sabbath of 7 years, and you have a 7th year of doing nothing, followed by a 50th year of doing nothing. So you have 2 Sabbaths in a row. Okay, and this is kind of important because when we talk about Jesus and his ministry, how is it Jesus is able to pull off 2 years of wandering around and the people wandering around doing nothing? And the reason for that is Jesus begins his ministry on the 7th year of a Sabbath, and it follows all the way through the 50th year of a Jubilee. So 2 Sabbaths in a row. And that's important because the next block of time after 50 years is an age. The Bible will generally always translate an age as being forever. But an age is a very specific period of time in Jewish belief systems. It's 1,000 years, or 20 50s. Because 20 times 50 is 1,000. So every 20 Jubilees is an age, or an eternity, or a forever. You know, but it's actually the proper way to say it is an age. The Jews in nearly all their writings talk about there being 7 ages in the span of mankind, from creation to the end. It's 7 ages. The first 6 ages belong to us, which we're coming to the end of, and the 7th age is the millennium, where the Messiah comes and reigns and rules us in our own stead. Okay. So armed with this, what does this kind of have to do with anything? Well, with Corinthians, well, this is what Paul is doing is he's running around and he's trying to raise money for the Jewish population in Jerusalem so that they can go and buy food. Because one of the problems, well, how food was distributed in that period of time was you had the temple in Jerusalem. Everybody ate at the temple. There were no restaurants, there were no markets, people didn't cook in their homes. They went to the temple to eat. All of the tithes that were brought in were prepared and cooked by the priests and served on big long tables, and the people came whenever they felt like it into the temple courtyard and ate. Okay? But all of this food came in the form of tithes. Okay, it wasn't sin offerings. Sin offerings were all burnt to a crisp. Then there was the temple tax, which was 2 days' wages for every man, woman, and child that was a Jew, no matter where they lived. And that was given to the priests for the administration of the temple itself, for the upkeep, for the repairs, for construction, and so that these priests could stick it in their back pockets, which is what they ended up doing more than anything else. So in the time of Jesus, these priests were accumulating probably close to $500 million in today's money. And it was divided up amongst effectively 24 families, of which there probably weren't more than about 100 of each. So these were some rich clampets running around here. You know, they had a lot of money. And so when Jesus comes on the scene, and they get a little bit offended by the fact that he's going to be the Messiah, they don't, you know, and the part about that bothers them is they're going to lose their access to $500 million worth of silver every year. You know, it's not a one-time lottery ticket. This is the gift that just keeps giving year after year after year to these guys. So they have a big problem with this. Okay, but getting back to what happens, well, think about it this way: if all of a sudden we have a year where nobody's growing anything, what happens to the tables at the temple? They get a little thin to bear. And prior to that, somehow or another, they'd always managed to accumulate enough excess in order to maintain food for the Sabbath year. But in the time of Jesus, and later, actually later than the time of Jesus, well after the time of Jesus, this table started to dry up. People just weren't bringing the tithes in during the Sabbath year to keep people eating, so they would get hungry and they would starve. Well, the Romans capitalized on this, bringing food in from other provinces, but made them pay in cash. And so what Paul is doing is something that even Peter did earlier, which was go around to the churches outside of the Jerusalem area and start begging money to give to these people so they can buy food from the Romans and eat. Okay, and this is where we pick up 2 Corinthians 8. And Paul's Paul had relatively good success among the Macedonians, which is a province. Actually, it's a whole country of its own. That's just to the north of Greece. And then you have several Greek city-states Corinth being one of them, Athens being another, etc. They are all, that Greek area now is all the Roman province of Achaia. So you have Macedonia, which is a Roman province just below it. It's Achaia is a Roman province, of which Corinth, the city, is in that province. So Paul comes around from Turkey, from Ephesus, around through Macedonia, around the Aegean Sea, through Macedonia, raises a pile of money in Macedonia. These guys are pretty good givers. And then ends up itinerating in Corinth, trying to raise money so that he can take that boat trip to the coast of Israel and march all this money to, or send somebody with the money at any rate, to Jerusalem. Okay, that's the history lesson. So it's starting in verse 1 of 2 Corinthians 8, it says, "Moreover, brothers, we make known to you the grace of the God, the one having been given among the churches of the Macedonians." Okay, he's setting these Corinthians up. First of all, these Corinthians have a little bit of a problem. They're not horribly good Christians. They haven't been Christians long, and they have all kinds of additional ideas, and they don't like Paul, and they're kind of a rebellious group of people who want to go their own way and do their own thing. And he's trying to rein them in and do it very tactfully. And so he says, "We make known to you the grace of the God," or the grace of God. And that, like all things Hebrew, it kind of means two different things. Grace is essentially a gift that's given by someone who has the power to give it for the pleasure of the person giving it. Okay, so there's this gift that's been given called by name, because this is all done with definite articles, the grace of God. And so the grace of God can be construed as being two things. One of them is the Holy Spirit can be called the grace of God. It's a gift from God to us, right? And it was given by God because it pleased him to do so. The other gift that we have is through Jesus Christ, which is deliverance from hell, deliverance from death when we die, to be resurrected in the millennium. That's the other gift that's given. So effectively you have two ideas amongst us, and they're related, directly related, because one causes the other for some strange reason in the eyes of the Jews. So you have this idea of everything that's involved in getting you from where you're at right now to resurrection in that seventh age, or that millennial age of Christ. Everything inclusive, Holy Spirit, the idea of resurrection, all the things that you get in between in exchange for you serving God. And then he says, "And the one having been given among the churches of the Macedonians." The Macedonians were not notoriously religious people. To say that they were pagans wouldn't even be right. To say that they were a pretty brutal group of people who were pretty self-serving was very, very accurate of these people. But it says the grace of God was given even to the churches of the Macedonians, which is kind of a shot, because the Corinthians thought themselves to be far superior in every way to everybody around them. And he's saying, no, there are other people who are far superior to you. They're called Macedonians. Get used to it. But the Macedonians are not necessarily a wealthy group of people. In fact, they're not wealthy at all. They're very, very poor, being essentially herders and farmers, and there's not a lot of trade that goes across Macedonia, being a mountainous area. Verse 2, "How that in great trial of tribulation the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded into the riches of their generosity." So now he's telling the Corinthians, oh, by the way, they're poor as church mice, but yet they dug into their pockets and they gave a pile of money for the cause of the mission in Jerusalem. And you don't see that, you have to understand the history of this, but that's essentially what he's telling them is, oh, by the way, your poor neighbor, just gave a pile of money. And what we don't see here is that this is actually like the third or fourth letter written to the Corinthians, the second on this particular subject of giving. Timothy has already been, and one of the apostles already been in Corinth in the previous year, drumming up money to do this, and they have been not well received. Okay, so he's given them a shot right there. Verse 3, from above their ability to perform and from close beside their self-chosen ability to perform, I bear record. So Paul says, I am telling you that I am the proof, I am proof that these people did something extraordinary based on their total lack. It would be like, asking poor people for $1 million and actually getting it. It kind of hails back to Jesus and a couple of fish and a couple of loaves. You chop this stuff up and all of a sudden there's mass quantities of this stuff that can do unbelievable amounts of work. Well, that's what he's trying to conjure here to the Corinthians with his description of the Macedonians. These people did something that theoretically they shouldn't have been able to do, which is raise a large amount of money. 4, after with much close personal urging, making urgent appeals of us that we would receive the gift and take upon us the fellowship of ministering to the saints. Paul and his company in Macedonia expected a little bit of money. What they got was a lot of money, and they realized that this was going to produce an extraordinary hardship on these Macedonians, and so they were kind of backing off, and they were saying, hey, you know what, maybe we shouldn't take this much money. Maybe we should take a smaller amount. And the Macedonians are saying, no, you take it all. It's what was raised, that's what you take. Okay? Verse 5, and not in proportion to the degree that we expected, but on the other hand, they themselves gave, first to the Lord, then unto us, because of the will of God. So Paul's saying they gave not in proportion to the degree that we expected, which is an understatement. They gave more. They gave way more than it was expected. Okay? 6, insomuch that we desired Titus, that as he had begun, so he would also finish in you the same grace also. So Paul introduces Titus now, who has been in Corinth for a while, trying to do exactly the same thing that Paul did in Macedonia, but without success. Okay? Even as in every way you abound in faith, in utterance, which is logos, in knowledge, which is not gnosis, which is that experiential knowledge that you get by actually doing something, and in all diligence, and this implies responding quickly with zeal, and in the love from us to you, that also you should abound in this, the grace. Okay, Paul has a habit of taking what people don't have and identifying it as virtues of theirs. In other words, if you're a total bum, I'm not going to call you a bum. I'm going to call you a person of great moral integrity. Right? That's what Paul does here. These people did not do what was expected of them, what they were potentially capable of doing. So what he does is he lists all of their shortcomings by labeling them as successes. He says, oh, you in every way abound in faith. Well, they didn't have any faith. You have tremendous logos. You have this knowledge. You have gnosis, which is experiential knowledge, comes from actually doing things, which they didn't do. But I mean, they've only been the previous years when the Christian faith came to them. So they've only been Christians for about a year, or at a church for about a year. So there's no way that they're going to have logos or the ability to speak and communicate effectively the things of Christ. There's no way they're going to have experiential knowledge because they just haven't been around long enough. It's like, saying to a 2-year-old, you have experiential knowledge compared to, say, Ruth here. It ain't happening. They have no experiential knowledge, and it'll be a long time before they get it. And in all diligence, which means responding quickly with zeal, they're not doing that either. And in the love from us to you, to see that you should abound in this grace. So he says, I'm grateful that you have all these things that came from our sacrifice, because that love is agape, which is the sacrifice, you could just well said sacrifice. And in the sacrifice from us to you, seeing that you also should abound in this grace. Okay, so he sets them up a little bit. And in verse 8 he says, I speak, and the word is logos there again. So he's speaking some idea that can't be argued. So I speak not by commandment, but by occasion for the forwardness of others and to prove the sincerity of your love. So he says, I know you have all these things, but I'm doing this to prove that you have them. I'm going to let you prove that you have them. He says, I know you do, but you got to prove to everybody else that you have them, essentially. Verse 9, for you know the grace of the Lord of us, Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that you through his poverty might be enriched. Okay. This is an interesting argument put together by Paul, because it implies some things about Jesus Christ that kind of goes against the grain of some of the things that we think we know about Jesus today. The first statement that he makes is that Jesus was rich. Okay, well, that's not entirely untrue. You have to realize where Jesus comes from. Jesus comes, forgetting Joseph all of a sudden because there's just not enough information about him. But let's look at his mother's family, Mary's family. Mary is a Levite of the tribe of Aaron, or the clan of Aaron. She's one of those recipients of the big bucks out of the temple every year. Okay, number one. Her uncle, or some uncle type person in her family that's directly related to Mary, whether it be a brother or her uncle, one of the two, is a fellow by the name of Joseph of Arimathea. He held the concession for the tin mining for the Roman Empire. Okay, how big of a deal would that be? Okay, that would be like saying that you own the entire steel industry in the world. That you are the only person who has the right to make steel in the entire world. Okay, that's a big deal. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
We're talking about there. So, does Jesus come from poor digs? Not really. His father. Oh, by the way, how he gets the carpenter thing, that's pretty cool. Okay, so in Israel, during this time, or in Judea, you were known by what you did during the Sabbaths, yearly Sabbaths. Okay, so didn't mean they didn't work, it just means they didn't tend their crops. And you were known by what you did when you weren't tending your crops for that 1 year, of which the Romans did tremendous construction projects in those years because it was available labor pool. So the Bible calls Joseph a carpenter. Well, a more accurate translation of that word would have been contractor. Okay, he was a guy that managed people who built things. Okay, that's who Joseph was. He was not a poor carpenter. He was a contractor, although sometimes contractors can be really, really poor, depending on where they're at in their boom and bust cycle. Okay, so that's where you get the idea that Jesus was poor because he lived in Nazareth, theoretically, or was from Nazareth, or Joseph was from Nazareth. And that was not exactly rich country up there, but that didn't necessitate the fact that Jesus was a poor orphanish sort of waif with nothing to eat. He actually came from a very wealthy family. But in order to do his ministry, he became poor. He started being itinerant. He wandered around speaking all over the place, and he ate whatever the people ate. He lived off of literally the land and the generosity of the people during this period of time. So he became poor. Yet for your sakes he became poor, that through his poverty you might become enriched. A nice play on words there, very poetic, but it means exactly what it says. 10, and as a judgment in this matter I give. So he starts out saying that he doesn't speak a commandment, as in, this is in the Bible, you have to do this. He's just saying, okay, I'm going to just, tell you something that can't be argued, that you already know. And then he concludes that, and he says, and a judgment in this matter I give. For this is profitable for you, not only the thing to do, but also the thing to desire, having begun a year ago. So he identifies the fact that these people have developed a relationship with Christ a year ago, and that as a matter of judgment, knowing about Jesus, knowing about the message is profitable, but it's also desirable. So you have to do things. You can't just do it. You have to desire it and do it. I mean, I can do a lot of things and been forced to do a lot of things in my life, but I have no desire to do. And I went through the motions. There's a lot of insincerity there. But there are other things that I've done in my life where I have had a great desire to do them, and I've done them, and they were so much more enjoyable and so much more profitable than the things that I did because I had to and I didn't want to. 11, now therefore perform the doing of it to complete it, that as there was a readiness to will, so there may be a performance also out of which you have. Okay, so you need to desire to do something, you need to do it, so get out there and finish it. 12, for if there be a predisposed willingness present, it is accepted according to that a man has. So in other words, some of us have a great desire to do something, some of us have not such a great desire to do something, and that's where he gets this idea of it is accepted according to that a man hath. But he's saying that we have to start out with a predisposed willingness. Some of us have a greater willingness than others, but we all have to have at least a minor amount of willingness to do the things that Jesus desires of us, or to be seeking Jesus. Is accepted according to that a man has, and not according to what he has not. For I mean, not that other men be eased, but for your affliction, but from out of equality. Okay, now he's getting to the heart of the argument that these Corinthians have about giving to the people in Jerusalem. Well, if we give like the Macedonians gave, then we're going to have nothing, and they're going to have everything. Think about that argument. This is the craziest argument in the world. I walk up to you and I say, I need $1. Okay? Now we're not even going to talk big money here. You only have $1. I don't have any $1. $1. And I say to you, I need $1. And you say, well, I've got $1, but I can't give it to you because if I give you my $1, then you have $1 and I don't have any. And you're going to be rich and I'm going to be poor. If you take it to that extension. If we give all of our money to you, then we're not going to have any money and they're all going to be rich. And they're going to have a life of ease and we're going to have to suffer. And so Paul says, get that out of your head. For I mean not that other men be eased, and that you be afflicted, but I want you to be equal. And what is this equality that he's talking about? We'll find out. 14, that now at this time your abundance may be a supply for their want, that their abundance also may be a supply for your want, that there may be equality. Okay, so here's the argument. if you do something nice for them, then the chances are they're going to do something nice for you when you're in trouble. And it's quid pro quo. We help each other. Okay? And so then Paul goes and quotes Exodus. And he says, as it is written, he that has gathered much has nothing over. He that has gathered little had no lack. So what he's basically quoting there is Exodus 16:18. And when they did give it out with an omer, he that gathered much had nothing left over, and he that gathered little had no lack. And they gathered every man according to his eating. And they're talking about manna there, by the way, and the manna that was on the ground. So if a person went out and gathered a lot, he gathered just as much as he needed. If a person didn't gather that much that day, he didn't obviously need that much. But they were all satisfied. So he quotes Exodus here on this idea of equality and inequality. And he says, if you give money to these people, or give them your money, you're not going to be lacking. In other words, you give me the buck, you don't have a buck. Yeah, you won't have a buck, but you won't be lacking. Okay? He says you're not going to starve if you give. If you sacrifice what you have, you're not going to starve. And he says, but thanks be to God which put the same earnest care into your heart of Titus for you. Well, he's saying basically that this is the same message that Titus gave you. Now I'm giving it to you again. 17, for indeed he accepted the exhortation, but being more forward of his own accord, he went unto you, and we have sent him the brother who has praised in the gospel throughout all the churches, somebody important. Incidentally, it's Timothy, his brother, literally his brother. But who was also chosen of the churches to travel with us with this grace, which is administered by us to the glory of the same Lord and declared of your ready mind. Okay, so what he's saying there is I'm going to send Titus to you and one other brother, who's incidentally Timothy, and I'm going to send him to you to gather up this gift for Jerusalem. And what he's doing there is he's actually quoting or going to an old Hebrew tradition, which is alms are gathered by two and distributed by three. So he's sending Titus and Timothy to go collect the alms, and then when it comes and the alms are collected, it's going to be Timothy, Titus, and Paul that deliver them to Jerusalem. So now the alms are distributed by three. Okay, that's where that comes from. That's what the reason that he's bringing up Titus and this other brother. Avoiding this, that no man should blame us in this abundance which is administered by us. In other words, you're going to give us a lot of money, but we don't want to be accused of stealing it or misappropriating it, so we're going to do it based on the tradition of twos and threes. Verse 21, providing for honest things not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. And we have sent with them our brother, whom we have oftentimes proved diligent in many things, but now much more diligent upon the great confidence which I have in you. If both beyond of Titus, my partner, and for you, a fellow worker, if both brothers of ours commissioned and sent forth unto the churches in the glory of God. Therefore the proof of the love of yours and the boasting about you, making fully evident to them in the presence of the church. So in other words, he's going to send Titus and Timothy to go collect this money so that they can prove that they are a part of the church. And the principal argument they have is if we give our money to them, we won't have any money. And what Paul counters with it says is if you give to them, God will provide even more blessing to you in some other way. Not directly from them, mind you, but blessing will come. You will be made whole. And so that's what kind of goes back to the idea of giving when God calls you to give. Yeah, you give, but the reality of it is you will be made whole again. In fact, not just made whole, but blessed over and above. It may not be with the same dollar you gave, it may be in some other way, but life is more than money. You know, the ease and comfort in our life is probably more important. You know, how difficult our life is. I had this conversation earlier. You know, after a while, you just sort of get tired of living. You know? Every day gets to be kind of the same. And unless you do something to change that or something changes in that, you just get just bored, tired. You've seen a lot of things. You know, I watch what goes on in the church, and I like to watch it because...
Or you're trapped.
Well, that too. It's kind of fun to see if they're going to learn, you know, do something different. You know, because life is about cycles, right?
Well, it's kind of like that remodel they're doing. It's a change over, refresh.
Yeah, of course. But life is about cycles, right?
Oh.
You know, you're born, you live, you die. People do the same stupid things, and they come back to the same circle, and they forgot they did them, so they do them again. You know? You know, it's like here, we like to get rid of pastors every now and again, you know, it's the same cycle.
Damn.
But maybe this one will keep. You know, maybe this one will be like Moses, he'll hang around a while. So, but the point is, you know, life gets boring. So what's the best thing that can happen to life? Maybe a little excitement, right? Something different. It's not bad, good, it's just something different. And it would be nice if something different came with a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Paul is saying, is you're not going to, you may not get what you gave, but you're going to get something good that's going to be a blessing that's going to make your life exciting and interesting. Does that make sense? For me, it would be, you know, if I had a boat, like I used to have a boat, it would be if I actually, you know, turned the key and it started on the first try, you know. And I didn't have to pull the engine cover off and go dinking around in the bowels of this thing to get it to run. That would be different. And that would be a blessing, and that would be good. So that's why I don't have a boat, by the way. It really reduces my aggravation.
You're blessed by not having a boat.
Say what?
I said you're blessed by not having a boat.
Oh, I know. It's a thing that everybody wants, but when they get it, they can't wait.
Just a money pit.
Oh, it is. You have no idea. Yeah. And they never pay for themselves. They never generate profits either. They're not even capable of it.
No way.
Yeah, but they're fun to have.
Yeah, they are. Everything's fun to have up for a while.
Yeah.
And then it gets to be a pain. You know, I used to like to grow gardens. This year I may or may not grow garden. I'm still ambivalent about it, but you know, I like to eat the fresh vegetables and whatnot. And this season I woke up and I said, you know what? I'm tired of this. I'm tired of doing this. I don't even want to do it. I don't even care if I starve to death as a result of not doing this. You know, it's like, I just don't want to do this anymore.
Just go over and visit Mama.
That's right. Well, she doesn't grow hers anymore either. She's apparently rented hers out this year too.
Because he didn't want to do it for the last 2 years.
No, I didn't. I mean, this has been coming on a while. Just like it just happened. But so, yeah. You know, so God's the argument is if we give, God will bless us with something new and interesting and different that we probably need in our lives to keep us going. So that's where we're going to end up today. We're not going to get to the end of it, but the end wasn't that interesting anyway.
Do you have an extra book?
Yes, I do, and I'll go get it for you.
Okay.
I think we still have books. But anyway, that's it. I suppose we can all go.